I want to thank Gordon Jones and Doug Gibson in particular for their determination to have a well-prepared board. Gene Kalin told senior official with the North Carolina Department of Commerce at the picnic in Waynesville that he had never worked with a better prepared committee than the ESOP Research Committee and Transition Committee in his days in this trade. And it is our hope that we can start today making similarly well-prepared people to make the tough judgments that board members will have to be making. My name is Frank Adams, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm with the Southern Appalachian Center for Cooperative Ownership, and we had the great honor to work with Local 507 as they pressed forward on this idea that they could buy the mill if it was up for sale. And in truth, here we are today. Virtually everyone at the table is an owner, and for that, I want to give you all a round of applause. I'd also now like to welcome James Hutchinson, the president of Local 2507 of PACE, and was the president of Local 507 throughout the year and a half that the buyout was going along.
I've never owned anything this vast, or been part owner of this vast majority of thing. The only thing I've ever owned is a home or a barn and a few cattle. But I feel like that if we, as a people, will keep buying together, like we have this first 45 days, and well, 2 months now. We got some good positive news last week at the meeting that we're moving in the right direction. And I feel like if we will keep applying ourselves and keep going the way we're going, I believe that we're going to make an impact upon the whole country, and the people have their eyes upon us. I'm proud to be the president of this local. We've had problems, but we're getting them ironed out. The transition's getting just a little bit smoother. And I'm sure that you people at the other places, the other dairy packs, you've got transition problems also. But I believe if we keep pulling together, I believe things will be all right.
If Gordon Jones would come to the podium, I'd appreciate that. Please welcome Gordon Jones.
This is a day that we talked about for a long time, trying to make sure that folks were understanding what we're trying to accomplish and trying to do things quickly and get a good understanding of the responsibilities of what it takes really to be on a board of directors of an organization like this. I see as part of this corporate situation a lot of interaction with the board, with the senior managers, a lot of interaction with the board, with me. The kinds of topics to cover, also my vision, and of course, as I've said before, subject to change, but the kinds of things that a board of directors ought to cover are the macro issues, the strategic issues. Those are, and not necessarily the tactical issues, but the strategic issues. Now, just to toss out an example, the board ought to be talking about major capital expenditures. The board ought to be looking at our 19 project. Our 19 project's a $30 million project. That's not the kind of thing that ought to be approved by myself or the management on the ground. That's too big a price tag. That kind of thing ought to go before the board. It ought to have board approval to spend $30 million if the board agrees on the number 19 board machine. So those are the kinds of things that we'll be presenting to the board. What I don't see the board meeting as doing is talking about, unless these are ongoing problems that are really affecting the overall mission of the company, such as someone missed a call-in procedure. If the third shift team manager or third shift foreman missed a call-in procedure somewhere, that doesn't mean that's something where we ought to work out the board. What is the call-in procedure on the 11 to 7 shift in Clinton, for instance? You know, I mean, that's not the kind of thing ought to go before the board. There are other teams, and I'll talk about it in a minute, that can address that kind of stuff. Also, I want it to be clear to everyone here, as I'm sure will be clear at the board meetings, the management team is accountable to the board of directors. Everybody's got to work for somebody. I work for the board of directors. So the people that are on the board of directors, control, hire, fire me. I mean, if we're ultimately successful, that's terrific as our plan, and I believe we're going to be. If we're not successful and wants to remove the CEO, the board of directors removes the CEO. It happens just like that. It doesn't take an extended kind of situation at all. So every manager and every person in a leadership position inside this company is ultimately accountable to their bosses, and ultimately all of them, including myself, are accountable to the board. So that's who we work for. We're not a bunch of independent cowboys out there doing our own thing. We have someone to answer to as well. I mentioned that the business unit leaders, thinking about George Hansen running the mill division, Philip running Waynesville, Howard running Derrick Pack, for instance, even Rich as the CFO, or Tom in charge of HR, and in our first board meeting as well as future board meetings, they'll be in from time to time to make presentations about hot topics of general interest for the board. And they'll have handouts, and they'll be providing you those handouts, which will also fall under this confidential mode. Some of it will and some of it won't. And as we mentioned before, we'll talk about what's appropriate to be communicated and what isn't. Also, it's been my experience on boards that there are a number of subcommittees that get formed, open to what each individual board wants to do. There might be a subcommittee to go address a specific problem or to work with the management team on this. In many cases, the board would just direct the management team to go solve that problem, work out a solution, bring it back to the board. But we can also put together a subcommittee of the board to direct or to investigate something specific. I think it was brought up by Bruce this morning. For instance, if we did have a closure issue or something like that where we were going to be impacting a sector of people, the board might choose to form a special committee to take a look at what their options are and be able to go from that. And I believe that's, in my mind anyway, from past experience, that's been appropriate.
Steve Presser represents the KPS Special Situations Fund. Will you please welcome him?
When we design these transactions, and we've been doing it for some time, and those of you who know me a little bit know that I've been doing this as a trade union lawyer for some time, we think that corporate governance is important. It's not simply a throw-in, it's not simply an add-on, it's not simply a salve, but it is an important function, an important facet of putting together a company that is employee-owned in whole and part. My job has been to advise, in part, union-nominated directors on boards. And I have to tell you, and we'll find out more, that it's not been an entirely even or easy process. In the early days when we did this this corporate governance stuff, corporate America, including the paper industry, thought we were nuts, and that there was no place for union designees, union delegates on a board of directors of either a private or a public company. We, over the years, and I think Bruce will go into this, and certainly my pal Steve Bonifera tonight will as well, have proven that wrong, that the ability to sit on a board of directors as a union designee can be a valuable part of a company's sort of growth, of its strategic direction, and its unity.
Bruce Householder is the immediate past executive director of the Worker Ownership Institute.
The basic duty of each director is to serve the company's owners by acting in the best interests of the company as a whole. The responsibility to the company as a whole must prevail over all personal and individual interests. The duty of each director is the same, including nominees of labor and management as well as independent directors. Duty of care, number 3. Directors have the duty to act carefully in carrying out their responsibilities. Directors are protected from liability from their decisions, including decisions as long as they do the following: act in good faith, have a reasonable basis for their action, do not have a conflict of interest. So I mean, these are issues that I want to address in a few minutes. Confidentiality. Directors have a responsibility to deal confidentially with all board members until there's a general disclosure of the information or the information is matter of public record or common knowledge. Let's go back to the duties of loyalty. As I see it, and I've dealt with in some of these companies that I've dealt with, and most of them are still worker-owned companies. The duty of loyalty is to make the best business decision. It puts you in a situation sometimes that is not always good for the membership of a union. It's hard to explain to the membership, and in a lot of cases you're not able to explain. But you always have to, as a director, make an independent decision that is the best business decision for all shareholders, whether it be the banks, the investment people, and the workers. Whoever owns the shares, that's who you make the business decision for. You want to make the best business decision so that it's an ongoing company. They can't, you wear three hats, as I see it. You're a union member. You may be a board of director. And thirdly, you're a worker. Now, how do we address those points? And I want to give you a couple examples. Sale of a company. I came from Republic Engineered Steel, which was recently sold. And if you go back through the sale, let's go back. The common stock came out at about $12 a share when it went to the public market. We were a 100% employee-owned company to that point. We took the company public. It opened on the public market at $12 a share. Over time, the shares of stock went down to about $1.25. What? Due to business conditions. Now, someone come in to purchase this company, offered $8 a share, I believe it was the price. So the board, here's the board sitting here, and the union people on this board, we had 4 union directors. They have to make a decision whether to sell this company. All this information now has gone through the plant. Everybody knows what's going on. How do I, as a union board member, explain this to the people? Well, a lot of this you can't explain because of confidentiality. You can discuss it in general terms. You can't discuss the buyer. So these people, it puts you as a union board director in an awkward position. I mean, history tells us that I've had guys that will absolutely say nothing at all to their membership or their co-workers. They'll say nothing. But I think we have to talk in general terms, and we have to communicate with them, and you'll get the legal part of what you'll be able to share with them as you go along. But here's a situation where they can't tell the employees a whole lot until the deal is done. So it puts a board member in a different light when you're in the plant. You're there with the workers, and you can't explain a lot to them during the process of what's going on. There's tough choices to make. They've made choices of shutting facilities down, whether to how to grow the business. There's good things about being a board member. When things are going real well, there's not a lot of questions from the membership. When things are going the wrong direction, you'll get a lot of questions from the membership. But it puts you in a different light because you have to make the best decision for the company and all the shareholders. All the shareholders. And that's what puts you in that position. You'll find out in the legal terms, when you're a board member, you cannot disclose certain things. And if you disclose certain things, there is a liability that goes with it. And I really believe in that. That's what puts a union board member in a tough situation. Where you as a union member really fit into these situations is you can speak from the heart and explain the situation and how the employees feel. Whether it be the sale of the company or whatever. You can explain your position in the board meeting. You can object, you can do different things, and you'll find that out. But when it comes down to it, it's a whole board decision. And it puts you in a bad situation, especially on some of these issues. And I stated that in the beginning. You're looking for the interest of everybody. It's a hard view to take when you're a union president and you're talking about shutting a facility. But you have to look at the whole picture, and you're right, Pete, you have to get the best for your membership. That's what you can do as a board member, is try to get the best. You try as hard as you can. Sometimes it's not enough. I've seen it's not enough. You can bring everything to the plate and everything to the table, and maybe you can do some things there with a little. I'll tell you what, you would be surprised if you got a good membership, what kind of ideas those people in that shop can come up with to save money so that plan is viable. Generally, when you want to shut a plant, there's a few reasons. Old and dated equipment, production costs are too high. But there's ways that people know. They've been working on those jobs, some of them 20, 30 years. They know how to save money. We try and make all the efforts that we can. We say that we can do certain things to save costs. And we take these things to the board to fight to keep that facility open. Not saying that it's going to succeed. That's just one thing. But the people there know their jobs in the plant generally and know how to help that company survive. I don't want to get off the beaten path, but at Republic, in the beginning, we saved over $20 million in costs. We started our ESOP in a bad time. Steel industry was declining. But the people pulled together and saved over $20 million in costs with cost-saving ideas. Little things add up to be a lot. But then the board really takes a perspective when you can tell them that our union membership saved X amount of dollars. The board listens. You take those issues to the board. You use those issues.
Our experience with union directors on the board over the past 19 years, I think, has taught us precisely what Pete had to say, namely that the people who are union designees on board of directors take their job seriously as any other director does, but they also take their constituency seriously, namely that they're on the board for a reason. They're on a board to bring a perspective to the board on a bunch of issues, including strategic issues and workplace issues, and they're on the board as a pair of ears for the union members as well. So in the early 80s and indeed into the 90s, we heard a lot of talk at the board level that union members couldn't be on the board for almost the reason in the example that Gordon gave, and we haven't found it to be that way. I mean, we found that In fact, in some companies, you talk to board members that are not the union board members, and they say they prefer having the union president on the board because they prefer one avenue of communication, maybe not two, as between the board and the union. So I hope as we go along this afternoon, talk a little bit more about the legal duties and a little bit more about the practicalities of information. We can talk more about this conflict issue, which everybody sees when you start in an employee-owned company. You say, what hat am I wearing? Am I the union guy? Am I the board guy? And the funny thing is the experience has taught us that that the conflict is easy to state, but in reality, it doesn't show up all that often.
Our next resource person is Jerry Kumar, a corporate attorney in Asheville.
I guess the chief risk to a board, really, in terms of legal issues, would be a lawsuit from a shareholder. Shareholders really are the focus of interest in the law. In other words, the directors need to keep as their guiding light the interests of the shareholders. And that need not necessarily be a short-term focus. It can be a long-term focus in terms of where the company is going, but always that's the guiding light. What is going to help the shareholders make money is really the ultimate question. And you can view that from a very narrow focus or from a very broad focus. A broad focus would consider the interests of employees, for example. If we have happy employees, we have better productivity, for example. So that's really the focus of the board under the law. Certain trouble spots are common enough that the drafters of the Model Business Corporation Acts saw fit to include these in statutes. One common area might be litigation involving the sale of the company. If the directors decide that the company needs to be sold and shareholders disagree with that, then they have certain rights to get an appraisal for their shares and to sell their shares. But that's not really the only trouble spot. The first one that's included in the statutes would be a hopefully not very common situation of unlawful distributions. And this basically refers to the board's decision to pay dividends on shares where the company cannot afford to. If after paying dividends to all of the shareholders pursuant to the board's decision, if after payment of those dividends the company would be rendered insolvent, and Ms. Keel can help us with the definition of insolvent, it just basically means that your debts are bigger than your income, and I know that you all know that, but if after paying the dividends the company would be insolvent, the directors are personally liable for the difference. That's a pretty important point to keep in mind. In a board meeting, directors are deemed to have assented to an action unless they make their protest known in the board meeting, and ideally that protest should be included in the minutes. In other words, if you just stay at the board meeting and don't say anything, the courts will assume that you have approved a transaction that is ultimately approved. Okay? And that has some bearing on, if things get bad and the board gets sued, that would have some bearing on your own personal liability. So if you don't agree with the course of action, speak up and let it be known that you do not agree. The last topic I'd like to go over is just a kind of a reminder that some types of actions, while they are considered by the board and typically recommended to shareholders, some types of actions can only be taken ultimately by the shareholders. In other words, the shareholders have the final say in whether or not these types of actions will be taken by the company. Those matters are reserved to the shareholders by the statutes which govern the company. And pretty much they involve fundamental changes to the company, such as a merger of the company with another company, or a sale of the company, or a sale of most of the company's assets, not in the ordinary course of business, of course, but a sale of a good portion of the plant, for example, or dissolution of the company, or finally, any matters that have been reserved to a shareholder vote in the Articles of Incorporation or the bylaws, such as amending the articles or the bylaws might be reserved to the shareholders. So if you're considering, for example, dissolving the company, the board needs to get together and make its decision on whether or not to recommend to the shareholders whether or not to dissolve the company or sell it or merge it. And then the shareholders have the final vote.
How often are directors, just as a rule, can you give us a sense of how often directors are called to account for their fiduciary duties in shareholder litigation?
Very rarely, very rarely. But you need to know, I mentioned all of these things just because you need to know legally what your duties are, and that there is always a risk that a shareholder may take it in his mind to sue the board. That's not to say, like you mentioned, that happens very often. It does not.
Most, not all, but most of those policies, as I understand it, are written to cover the director for monetary liability in case a judgment is rendered against the director in that kind of litigation. What those policies don't cover, what our policy certainly doesn't cover, are actions of a director that amount to stealing in some respect, whether it's taking a corporate opportunity, as Jerry discussed earlier, or the types of breaches of the duty of loyalty that amount to taking proceeds of the corporation for your own personal benefit. That's hard to insure against.
Having said that, it's fair to say that everyone that's a director who might find delivered to them someday a heartwarming lawsuit with their name on it, named as part of a board member of Blue Ridge Paper Products and that sort of thing, that is not heart attack time for the people that are on that what happens is that there's the company, there's rules, there's laws, and that the company provides for good legal defense and those kinds of things. So you're really not mortgaging the family farm, so to speak, in order to serve as a board member of Blue Ridge Paper Products. I guess that's the point that I want to make.
Now, if you would, please welcome Elizabeth Keel from Asheville of Burleson and Keel CPA firm.
Okay, so you have external forces and internal forces that are going to be interested in financial information. The internal forces we've already talked about, management and shareholders. The external forces will be your creditors and your investors. Your creditors are going to be interested in whether or not you all are liquid or whether or not you're solvent. And that essentially means if you're liquid, you have the ability to meet your short-term obligations. If you're solvent, you have the ability long run to generate operating cash. Investors are going to be interested in making sure that your future prices are secure and that your company can pay dividends. Now, in this particular situation, again, you're closely held. And that may not be the case at all, because you may have, your loyalty stays with the shareholders. The shareholders are the ESOP and KPS. And so that means that KPS as a shareholder and the ESOP as a shareholder, together you have specific goals for your company. And so it may be that your goals aren't to pay dividends, and that's okay. It may be that your goals are to grow the company for a specific purpose, for an eventual sale, to the employees. But what you want to do is you want to understand, before you look at any financial information, you want to understand what the goals are and get a good bird's eye view of whether or not the strategies that you're implementing will accomplish those goals. And it's not, again, for the purpose of going unilaterally to Mr. Jones and explaining that you have some point of view that is different for this particular strategy. You don't like it or whatever. It's more for the purpose of sitting back and waiting and educating yourselves about what the financial information is telling you. And once you've waited and you've had a chance to watch the company operate, then you have an opportunity to be a more effective advisor when management comes to you and says, this is what we would like to do, this is what we believe the results will be, and it will be much more common for you to be looking up and adding to something that management is doing and contributing and seeing things that they may not see. It's much less common that someone would have some new idea of their own that the board would ultimately implement. I'm on page 7 now. I want to talk about the purpose of financial analysts. It's not, it isn't complicated. It's very specific. This is the whole picture. You analyze financial information because you either want to assess risk or because you want to know what your long-run profitability is going to be. The best example that I could find of somebody failing to integrate financial information with decision-making was with Texas Instruments. I don't know how many of you remember Texas Instruments. Probably a lot of you do, but that company had the cutting edge in technology for semiconductors. And it was so intent on saturating and capturing the market, it thought that it could do it by something very simple, accumulating its volume and reducing costs. And in front of you, there are basically two curves. One curve is just a plain efficiency curve. And as your company goes from being brand new to walking through time to getting old, you will get so efficient that it's impossible for you to get any more efficient. And so as a board member, what you want to learn is where that point is, because if you put pressure on your management to be more efficient than they can be, then you will start to put pressure on them to sacrifice qualities that will hurt your market. And so you really have to watch to learn what that is. Learning is going to get you just a little bit more efficient in your cost. And so it's going to drop that curve down just a little bit more and make you more competitive in your market, not because you're cheaper, but because your costs are lower than that of your competition. But again, there's a minimum there. It levels out. And so you don't want to put pressure again on your management to be more effective than it can be.
What are some of the signs of the consistency or the management knowing that's as far as they can go? What are some of the signs?
Well, one of the things I want to do, if you don't mind, is walk through it. I hope it comes out in what I'm doing. I can see that I'm losing track with my slides, so if I get past it really quickly, just let me know. But in general, if you're keeping historical financial information, which you have to some degree, I mean, even though your initial numbers have some champion corporate allocations with them, you still have some feel for what it costs to actually make your best quality product. If that's what you all decide, if that's the direction you decide to go, we'll assume if you're deciding to go top quality product, you know about what that is. And so you simply watch the financial information, the ratios come together and plot your costs as you walk through time. Your curve should look like that. And at some point it'll just flatten out.
Elizabeth, at the point it flattens out, you're talking about prior to consideration of any new equipment which might improve your efficiency to take it to a new and lower low.
That's right. You'd have to factor all of that kind of information in.
So to me, the pushing of management is, you do what you can do with what you have, and then you figure out what you have to do to get better than that, and that might I mean, you might reach certain physical limitations on equipment, like Steve might have physical limitations on equipment over the pulp mill. But at some point, if we want to grow the operation, then maybe we've got to get different kinds of equipment. We got to expand. We have to do that. That's also management responsibility. So, I guess my additional thought is there's probably no point at which you don't continue to challenge management for greater efficiencies. You hit different thresholds given different scenarios, and then management's responsibility is to develop the next threshold and identify for the board what do you have to do to get to the next threshold. And that might mean an investment in money, that might mean an addition of people, that might mean whatever.
I guess I'm being critical of our former owners, but I think that's a whole lot there's their problem. We did everything we could do, and they want to do a little bit more, and that's where the reason we're in the shape of a lot of situation issues we've got to deal with right now. And I got to know where to start dealing with these issues.
Yeah, that's an honest struggle, and part of being a bird's eye board is understanding that the traditional struggles between accounting and marketing are going to be there, and for a very valid reason. There are going to be members on your board that are looking up and saying, I want an appropriate quality, and I want it to be adequate, I want it to be the very best. And that force is going to work against somebody that goes, if you focus that hard on quality, you're going to pull us right out of our market. We're not going to be able to, we're going to be sitting here with the best paper on the planet, and it's going to be warehoused. And that'll really drive our costs up and put us out of business. So those forces will temper each other. And if you have a manager who has a very aggressive style and he really wants to make sure that he gets costs down and improves his cash flow, then sit back for just a couple minutes and look up. He may need to improve his cash flow on a short run for the purpose of purchasing equipment that will make the company have a long run profit. So just be patient and understand what the ultimate goal is, what the purpose is for the short run, and what the purpose is for the long run, because they are, if you get long run focused and you see that somebody is looking at short-term cash flow, unless you understand that it is for a short period of time, or if you don't see that at all, you may put pressure on the board to make a decision that is, as Jerry explained earlier, not a legal issue, but might be the wrong decision because you don't have adequate information. You didn't relax and allow yourself to see all of the points that are associated with making that decision.
As a member of the board, and you're wearing these sometimes 2 or 3 hats or whatever it might be, the management team and the business team and the employees, I mean, everybody expects to get pushed to work hard. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. The question is, how hard do you push, and then at what point is, okay, that's what you can get out of that tactic. Now, where's the next tactic? We ought to expand our business. We ought to get a different piece of equipment. We ought to stop doing that altogether. We ought, whatever it is. And as a board member, kind of expanding on some of my previous remarks, I mean, I'm hoping that the board members push the management team, and right up to the point of pushing and asking, really good questions. In other words, if George is in making a presentation and saying, I can get 850 tons a day off the number 19 paper machine, if all the board members sit there and nod and say, well, that's good, that sounds pretty good, 850, thanks a lot, the room goes quiet. I mean, I think it's totally legitimate for the board to say, George, what happens when you get 900 tons a day off the number 19 paper machine? To the cost of the Canton mill, George would know it goes from $500 a ton to $480 a ton or something. What do you have to do in order to be able to get 900 tons a day off of the 19 paper machine, in order to get the advantage of that cost, in order to have the yield come back to the company? I mean, your management team ought to be ready to answer some of those questions, or ought to at least say, well, we'll get you some more definitive stuff back later. But what I got to do, I got to expand the pulp mill. Well, what do we have to do to expand the pulp mill? Well, we need to go back and re-permit this, and the group that's running the operation, and really all of us need to know enough about it so that we're asking questions. And the board meeting, I'm hoping, is going to be a free interchange of questions and challenging, and it isn't just a, management says this, everybody listens, that's fine, or that we say the only way we're going to ever get from 850 to 900 tons, well, we're just going to have to do it with half as many people on the paper machine. That's the only way we can do it, half as many people on the paper machine. That's not necessarily the answer either. So it's those kinds of good questions. And when I've been in good board meetings before in previous lives, it's the board members who would ask those questions that you'd always, at the end of it, you'd walk out and you'd say, darn, they really, that's a good question. And that would kind of energize you to go look in a direction about trying to improve the business. And am I really looking at people versus equipment? Am I really looking at market expansion? So those are the macro kinds of things that board members can really help the management team with. And when the management, and then know enough about it, that when the management team comes in and says, I need $30 million for the number 19 paper machine, and we go through that presentation, then it's not, you got to be kidding me. I don't think you need, one board member said, I don't think you need any money at all. I think you just need half as many people and work them twice as hard. That's, people need to understand enough about the business and need to be deeply involved in it enough. So it's an active membership of the board. And just one last soapbox remark is that you don't learn that by just being in a board meeting and asking the questions that you want to ask on that, every month or every quarter or how often we're going to have board meetings. A lot of that has to do with learning the business and investigating and being involved along the way, so that when the board meeting comes, you've got the questions that you want to ask, ready to be asked, and those are good, solid, informed questions, and hopefully you've got some answers too that you can suggest to the board. So anyway, it all boils down to managing the business together, I think.
I needed to take a breath between this. How to calculate ratios is very simple. Once you understand the components of each of the ratios, you really don't get much above just plain algebra. So don't let ratio analysis intimidate you. Why am I concerned that it might intimidate you? Because traditionally, among financial analysts, there's puffing that happens as if it is so complicated. Well, it really isn't complicated at all. It sometimes can be complex what components you might need to consider as you're calculating the ratio, but the ratio itself always boils down to addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, and it doesn't get any more complicated than that. So given that, and given the fact that the basic formulas are provided for you in the back of your material, it looks like we won't have time to get to them. But I want you to understand when you're using those ratios, in order to think about a particular business strategy, you're not going to just isolate a ratio. You're not even going to isolate or think of a group of ratios just as the ratio calculation itself. You want to always think about financial information horizontally, meaning as it goes through time, or vertically, and that means as the particular pieces of the financial information in front of you, how do they relate to each other? Okay? Horizontal is going through time. Vertical is, an example of vertical is a particular cost against net sales. Okay? Okay. And so you use horizontal analysis when you're looking at financial information to get a feel for the existing trends for your business. You use vertical analysis to gain an understanding of what particular problems or advantages your particular business has. You may have an excellent return on total assets, which is basically how much money is dropping down to the bottom line compared to the investment that you have in this company. That's all that means. And so if your return on total assets is very good, that simply means that you have taken a small amount of assets compared to those in your industry, and you've dropped a lot of money down to the bottom line for your shareholders after you've operated through the year. That's really what that means. And so when you look at your return, if you just look at your return, well, how would you know whether or not your return is good or bad? Well, you don't have a way of knowing unless you compare how you're doing with other people. And so you have lots of people to compare yourselves to now. You have publicly held corporations that you can compare yourselves to. You have other closely held corporations that you can compare yourself to. You want to identify your main competition. You certainly want to compare yourselves to them, at least with what information you have that's available. And then you can compare how you're doing now to how you've done in the past and how you perceive yourselves to be doing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with companies is that there's no such thing as off-limits information to the board, but generally that information is kind of centrally controlled and given to the board, so you make sure that everybody's getting the same thing, they're getting the same format, everybody has the same set of facts when you're meeting. But if you're not getting what you want, then in the board meeting you need to make that very clearly known.
And that is senior management's job to provide.
Senior management's job is to provide you with the information you need as a board member.
Okay.
And sometimes you'll have deliberations over an issue, and there's not enough information to make a decision. And your recommendation may be, you guys need to go back and come back to me with, or come back to us with the steps 1, 2, and 3. It could be more information. It could be a consultant's report. And it could be lots of different things. But it's senior management's job to give you the information you need to make an informed decision. And if you don't feel like you're getting that information, then you need to raise your hand and get the information.
So when you think about the role of the board, it is one of the more, I guess, the most senior directing body within the company.
Yeah, absolutely. You have responsibility for the CEO.
Right. So it's the most senior directing body in the company, which means that the company will respond to the board in terms of information, report outs, in a way that they get all the information they need to operate.
Absolutely. There's really no off-limit kind of situation. You don't want board members outside the context of a board meeting, walking out to the plant and asking individuals, strategic kind of questions. And you want it all done, properly and in the right kind of channels. But as a board member, you have access to every level within the organization. It's not healthy for the company to come in here and say, this is what we want to do and why we want to do it, and everybody just kind of nods and approves it and goes on. You want people who are going to ask the why question and make sure that whatever the company wants to do is a good utilization of resources. And again, your owners, it's your company and your resources at stake.
It's a difficult issue. It's a challenging issue in an employee-owned company, an ESOP company, to sort of confront what is very much a sort of a marketplace reality for executive compensation. It turns out, it's too bad it turns out this way, that in the world of hiring people that you want to run your company, you get what you pay for. And it also turns out that no one more than us, KPS and all the employee shareholders, have a greater stake in bringing the best talent we can to run this company. So in order to do that, we have to pay for it, and it's a controversial issue.